Good morning, everyone. In last lecture, we have completed two important hormones of adrenal cortex, that are aldosterone and cortisol. In today's lecture, we are going to start next topic, that is adrenal sex hormones. Adrenal sex hormones are also secreted from adrenal cortex, but particularly from the zona reticularis. So let us start. Adrenal sex hormones. Adrenal sex hormones are secreted mainly by zona reticularis. As there are three zones in the cortex region of adrenal gland, outermost zone is zona glomerulosa, middle one zone is zona fasciculata, and inner one zone is zona reticularis. This zona reticularis is in close contact with the adrenal medulla. From these various zones, various hormones are secreted. As we have seen in the previous lecture, aldosterone, that is mineralocorticoid, which is secreted from zona glomerulosa. Then next zone or the middle zone is zona fasciculata. From this zone, glucocorticoids are secreted, while innermost zone, that is zona reticularis, and from this zone adrenal sex hormones are secreted. So source of secretion is zona reticularis. Then small quantities of adrenal sex hormones are also secreted from the middle zone, but most common or mainly it is secreted from zona reticularis. But in small quantity, zona fasciculata also secretes sex hormones. This zona reticularis also secretes glucocorticoid hormones, but in very less quantity. So this is about source of secretion of adrenal sex hormones. So source of secretion of adrenal sex hormones, most common source is zona reticularis, while from zona fasciculata also secretes adrenal sex hormone, but in very less quantity. Adrenal cortex secretes mainly androgens. Androgen, that means male sex hormones. And whereas small quantity estrogen and progesterone are also secreted. So from zona reticularis mainly androgens are get secreted out, but in small quantity estrogen and progesterone, that means female sex hormones, are secreted in very small quantity. Androgens secreted by adrenal cortex. So which androgens are get secreted from the zona reticularis? So let us see that androgens. First one is dihydroepiandrosterone, while second is androstenedione, while third one is testosterone. So these are the three androgens which are secreted from adrenal cortex. So out of these three androgens, first one, that is dihydroepiandrosterone, is the most active out of these three androgens. In general, androgens are responsible for masculine features of the body, because these are the male sex hormones, and male sex hormones are responsible for masculine feature, development of masculine features. So in general, androgens are responsible for masculine feature of the body, but because of the low amount of secretion in both males and females, they have insignificant physiological effects. That means from zona reticularis they are secreted in very low amount, and because of low amount of secretion in both males and females, they have insignificant physiological effects. So adrenal sex hormones have insignificant physiological effects because they are secreted from zona reticularis in very low amount, while from zona fasciculata they are secreted in very least amount. Then applied physiology. In congenital hyperplasia or tumor of zona reticularis, an excess quantity of androgens are secreted out. When there is a congenital hyperplasia or tumor of the zona reticularis, that means there is a hypersecretion of androgens. And when there is an excess quantity of androgens get secreted out, what will happen? Then in females it will cause some symptoms, but in males it does not produce any special effect because large quantity of androgens are produced by testes also. So in males it does not produce any special effect, but while in females androgen produce masculine features. So this is about applied physiology of adrenal sex hormones. When there is a tumor or congenital hyperplasia, that means from birth there is a hyperplasia of zona reticularis, that means these cells are get increased, and due to increase in their cells or tumor of the zona reticularis, they secrete large quantity of androgens. But in males, when there is a large quantity of androgen gets secreted out, it does not produce any special effect because already from testes androgens get secreted out. So in males it does not produce any special effect, but in females, when androgens get secreted out in large quantity, in females it produces masculine features. Next is applied physiology. This is about total adrenal cortex. So first is Cushing syndrome or Cushing disease. In this disease or syndrome, there is a hypersecretion of glucocorticoids and particularly cortisol. The next applied physiology we will see, that is hyperaldosteronism, that means increased secretion of aldosterone. So let us see one by one applied physiology of adrenal cortex. So here we have completed adrenal cortex region of adrenal gland, but in next lecture we will see adrenal medulla or hormones of adrenal medulla. So here we have completed three important hormones. Out of these three important hormones, two are most important, that are aldosterone and cortisol. So aldosterone is secreted from zona glomerulosa, and aldosterone is one of the mineralocorticoid hormone, while cortisol is a glucocorticoid hormone and that is secreted from zona fasciculata. But in small quantity, this cortisol is also secreted from zona reticularis. Then after these two hormones we have seen in this lecture, adrenal sex hormones that are secreted from zona reticularis. But adrenal sex hormones have insignificant effect because they are secreted in very small quantity from zona reticularis, so that they are not producing any most important effects, because in males already androgens are secreted from testes, but when there is abnormality, that means tumor of zona reticularis, then it will produce some masculine feature in the females, but there is no any effect in the males because it is normal condition for males. Then next topic is applied physiology of adrenal cortex. So first terminology is Cushing syndrome and Cushing disease. So these are the two different things, Cushing syndrome and Cushing disease. So what is the difference between Cushing syndrome and Cushing disease? So Cushing syndrome is the hypersecretion of cortisol, that means glucocorticoid, but the origin or the cause is in adrenal gland. So in syndrome, cause is present in adrenal gland itself, while in Cushing disease, cause is present in the pituitary gland or out of the adrenal gland. While in Cushing disease, there is a hypersecretion of cortisol, that means glucocorticoids, and due to pituitary cause. So causes are different, so that there is a difference in Cushing syndrome and Cushing disease, while in Cushing syndrome, cause is present in adrenal gland, while in Cushing disease, cause is present in pituitary gland. But there is a hypersecretion of cortisol or glucocorticoids is the same thing. Cortisol secretion is increased by tumor in zona fasciculata of adrenal cortex, as middle one zone is responsible for secretion of glucocorticoids, and cortisol is one of the glucocorticoid. And when there is a tumor of zona fasciculata, that means there is a hypersecretion of glucocorticoids or hypersecretion of cortisol. So the cause is present in adrenal gland, that means tumor present in zona fasciculata of adrenal cortex. Then second cause is carcinoma of adrenal cortex. When there is a carcinoma or metastatic tumor present in adrenal cortex, particularly zona fasciculata region, then it will cause hypersecretion of cortisol. Then third one causes prolonged treatment of chronic inflammatory disease, that means exogenous glucocorticoids. If any patient taking exogenous cortisol or exogenous that means from outside of the body. So when patient taking exogenous glucocorticoids for chronic inflammatory diseases, and why patient takes these glucocorticoids for chronic inflammatory diseases? Because cortisol has one important action, that is anti-inflammatory action. And when in a patient of chronic inflammatory diseases, these glucocorticoids or cortisols are given for preventing inflammatory responses. And when there is a prolonged treatment or prolonged taking exogenous cortisol, it will lead Cushing syndrome also. So this is the Cushing syndrome causes. So out of this, most important cause are tumor and carcinoma present in the adrenal cortex region, particularly zona fasciculata. And when there is a tumor or carcinoma in zona fasciculata region of adrenal cortex, there is a hypersecretion or abnormal hypersecretion of cortisol, and this lead to Cushing syndrome. In the syndrome, cause is present in adrenal gland. While talking about Cushing disease, here the cause is present in the pituitary gland. So origin of this disease is from pituitary gland. Increased secretion of ACTH causes hyperplasia of adrenal cortex, leading to hypersecretion of glucocorticoids. So here increased secretion of ACTH, and this increased secretion of ACTH is due to tumor of anterior pituitary, because ACTH is secreted from anterior pituitary region, particularly which cells, corticotropic cells of anterior pituitary. And when there is a hyperplasia of corticotropic cells or tumor of corticotropic cells, there is an increased secretion of ACTH, and this increased secretion of ACTH causes hyperplasia of adrenal cortex. Why increased secretion of ACTH causes hyperplasia of adrenal cortex? Because ACTH has important action, that is stimulation of adrenal cortex, and when there is a increased secretion of ACTH, this increased secretion of ACTH causes increased stimulation of adrenal cortex, and when there is a continuous stimulation of adrenal cortex, it leads to hyperplasia of adrenal cortex. And when there is a hyperplasia of adrenal cortex, it leads to hypersecretion of cortisol, that means hypersecretion of glucocorticoids. So here cause is present in pituitary gland, but it affects the secretion of cortisol or glucocorticoids. So ACTH secretion is increased by following causes. First one is tumor in the pituitary cells, and particularly which cells? Corticotropic cells, because corticotropic cells are responsible for secretion of ACTH hormone. So when there is a tumor in pituitary cells or tumor of corticotroph cell, there is an increased secretion of ACTH, and when there is an increased secretion of ACTH, it will lead increased stimulation of adrenal cortex, and when there is an increased stimulation of adrenal cortex, there is an increased secretion of cortisol or glucocorticoids from the adrenal cortex. Then second cause is malignant tumor of non-endocrine origin like cancer of lungs or abdominal viscera. So malignant tumor of non-endocrine origin, that means malignancy present in the lungs, malignancy of abdominal viscera, and these malignant tumor cells produces secretion of ACTH abnormally. So there is an increased secretion of ACTH. Then third one cause is hypothalamic disorder. So hypothalamic disorder also responsible for increased secretion of ACTH because CRH is the hormone which is secreted from hypothalamus, and CRH is corticotroph releasing hormone. So corticotroph releasing hormone stimulates anterior pituitary to secrete ACTH. So when there is a hypothalamic disorder, that means there is an increased secretion of CRH, and when there is an increased secretion of CRH, that means corticotropin releasing hormone, so there is an increased stimulation of corticotroph cells, and when there is an increased stimulation of corticotroph cells, it leads to increased secretion of ACTH. So these are the causes which are of Cushing disease. The causes are present outside of the adrenal glands, that means tumor present in pituitary cell, tumor or malignant tumor of non-endocrine origin such as cancer of lungs, and when these malignant cells of lungs or abdominal viscera produces abnormal secretion of ACTH. Then third one cause is hypothalamic disorder because hypothalamus secretes CRH hormone, and which is responsible for stimulation of corticotroph cells. So these are the causes of Cushing disease, and these causes are present outside of the adrenal gland. When causes are present in adrenal gland, then terminology we use, that is Cushing syndrome, and when causes are present outside of the adrenal gland, then terminology is used Cushing disease. So Cushing syndrome, causes are present in adrenal gland, while in Cushing disease causes are present in the pituitary gland or outside of the adrenal gland. The next terminology is hyperaldosteronism. So just we have seen Cushing syndrome and Cushing disease. So these are the terminologies which are used for hypersecretion of glucocorticoids, that means cortisol. So next terminology is hyperaldosteronism. So here it is the applied physiology related to mineralocorticoids, that means aldosterone. So hyperaldosteronism, that means increased secretion of aldosterone, and this terminology is called as hyperaldosteronism. So increased secretion of aldosterone is called as hyperaldosteronism. Causes tumor in zona glomerulosa of adrenal cortex because zona glomerulosa secretes mineralocorticoids hormones, that means aldosterone. So when there is a tumor in the zona glomerulosa of adrenal cortex, there is an increased secretion of mineralocorticoids and increased secretion of aldosterone because aldosterone is mineralocorticoid. So this is about adrenal cortex. So we have completed adrenal cortex with its applied physiology. A short recap on adrenal cortex is that adrenal cortex consists of three zones. First zone is zona glomerulosa, second or middle zone is zona fasciculata, and third zone is zona reticularis. So zona glomerulosa secretes mineralocorticoids, zona fasciculata secretes glucocorticoids, and zona reticularis secretes sex hormones. So small quantities of sex hormones are also secreted from zona fasciculata, while small quantity of glucocorticoids are also secreted from zona reticularis. So out of the mineralocorticoids which are secreted from zona glomerulosa, aldosterone is the most important hormone, and aldosterone has three important actions or functions, that are reabsorption of sodium ions, excretion of potassium ion, and excretion of H plus ions. So overall, aldosterone is responsible for sodium retention in the body or sodium conservation in the body, because aldosterone acts on renal tubules and it causes reabsorption of sodium from renal tubules. Aldosterone also acts on salivary glands. It causes retention of sodium, while in the sweat gland there is the same action, that is retention or reabsorption of sodium. While in intestine, aldosterone causes absorption of sodium. So overall, aldosterone is responsible for retention of sodium in the body, while it is also responsible for excretion of potassium. So when there is a aldosterone deficiency, that means there is a decreased excretion of potassium. That means increased level of potassium in blood, that means hyperkalemia. And this hyperkalemia is quite dangerous to heart because it causes arrhythmia in the heart, and due to the weak contractions of heart it will lead cardiac death also. So aldosterone is one of the important hormone, and which is mineralocorticoid, acts on minerals such as sodium and potassium. So next hormone from glucocorticoids, that is cortisol. These glucocorticoids are secreted from middle zone in large quantity, while in small quantity they are secreted from zona reticularis. So out of glucocorticoids, cortisol is the most important glucocorticoid, and this cortisol has many important actions, such as it causes gluconeogenesis. Also, it causes catabolism of proteins and utilization of fats. Also, it prevents inflammatory responses, allergic reactions, and immune reactions in the body. In bones, cortisol also important action, that it causes bone resorption. That means calcium ions are removed from bones. So, over secretion of cortisol or hyper secretion of cortisol leads to osteoporosis also. Then we have seen most important action in the blood cells. Cortisol is responsible for decrease in lymphocytes and eosinophils, while increase in RBC count, platelet count, and neutrophils. So these are the actions of cortisol or glucocorticoids. Then next hormone we have seen, that adrenal sex hormone. So out of the sex hormone, androgens are more secreted from the zona reticularis, while in small quantity estrogen and progesterone are secreted from adrenal gland or adrenal cortex, particularly zona reticularis. But these sex hormones are secreted in very least or small quantity, so that there is an insignificant effect from these hormones, that means adrenal sex hormones. After that, we have seen applied physiology of adrenal cortex, that is Cushing syndrome and Cushing disease. So Cushing syndrome, the cause is present in the adrenal gland, while in Cushing disease causes are present in the pituitary gland. So most causes are tumor which are present in the adrenal gland or pituitary gland. After that, we have seen hyperaldosteronism, that means hypersecretion of aldosterone, and this hypersecretion is caused due to tumor of zona glomerulosa cells. So let us start next topic, that is adrenal medulla. So adrenal medulla is the inner region or inner part of adrenal gland, and it consists of only 20%, while adrenal cortex consists of 80%. So medulla is the inner part of adrenal gland, and it forms 20% of the mass of adrenal gland, while 80% is adrenal cortex or the outer part of adrenal gland. So we have seen their development and structure in basic introductory lectures of adrenal gland. So adrenal medulla is developed from neural crest, and from this neural crest sympathetic nervous system is also developed. So the secretions of sympathetic nervous system and adrenal medulla are same, and as their secretions are same, their actions or functions are also same, while adrenal cortex is developed from mesonephros. So kidney is also developed from this mesonephros. So these two parts are totally different in their development. That is, cortex or adrenal cortex is developed from mesonephros, while adrenal medulla is developed from neural crest. So secretions of adrenal medulla are also neurotransmitters such as adrenaline, noradrenaline and dopamine. So the adrenal cortex releases glucocorticoids in response to long-term stress. So we have seen this function of glucocorticoids, that resistance to stress. So glucocorticoids are responsible for resistance of long-term stress, that means chronic stress such as severe illness. So illness from too much long duration or physical stress or mental stress of long duration. So long term stress is resisted by glucocorticoids, while in contrast adrenal medulla releases its hormone in response to acute or short term stress mediated by sympathetic nervous system. So hormones which are released from adrenal medulla are responsible for resistance of short term stress, that means very acute stress. Then next is adrenal medullary tissue is composed of unique postganglionic sympathetic nervous neuron called as chromaffin cells or pheochrome or chromophil cells. I have just told you that sympathetic nervous system and adrenal medulla both are developed from neural crest during embryonic stage, and as these both parts are developed from neural crest, that means they are neural or neuronal in origin. So medullary tissue is composed of unique postganglionic sympathetic nervous system neurons, that is chromaffin cells, pheochrome or chromophil cells. So adrenal medulla is consist of chromaffin cells or chromophil cells or pheochrome cells, the same cells but having different names. So medulla is consist of chromaffin cells or chromophil cells or pheochrome cells, which are large and irregular shape. So these cells are large in size but having irregular shapes, and these cells produces neurotransmitters such as epinephrine, norepinephrine. So epinephrine is also called as adrenaline and norepinephrine is also called as noradrenaline. So medulla is consist of chromaffin cells or chromophil cells or pheochrome cells. These cells having large size with irregular shape, and these cells are responsible for secretion of neurotransmitters such as adrenaline and noradrenaline. As these cells are developed from neural crest, so they secretes neurotransmitters. So adrenal medulla secretes neurotransmitters such as adrenaline and noradrenaline. So adrenaline is also called as epinephrine, while noradrenaline is also called as norepinephrine. Then types of chromaffin cells. So adrenal medulla is formed by two types of chromaffin cells. First one is adrenaline secreting cells and second one is noradrenaline secreting cells. So adrenaline secreting cells are 90% while noradrenaline secreting cells are only 10%. So epinephrine, that means adrenaline, is produced in greater quantities. Approximately the ratio is 4:1 with the norepinephrine. That means 4:1 is the ratio of adrenaline to noradrenaline, because epinephrine or adrenaline secreting cells are 90%, so that adrenaline or epinephrine are secreted in more quantity or greater quantity, and ratio is 4:1. That means 4 parts are secreted of epinephrine or adrenaline, while only 1 part of norepinephrine or noradrenaline is secreted out from adrenal medulla. And this is because adrenaline secreting cells are present 90% in the adrenal medulla, while noradrenaline secreting cells are present only 10% in the adrenal medulla. So, ratio is also 4:1. Adrenaline or epinephrine. So, hormones of adrenal medulla. So, we have seen the hormones of adrenal medulla, that are adrenaline, noradrenaline, and third one is dopamine. So, adrenaline is also called as epinephrine, while noradrenaline is also called as norepinephrine, and third one or last one hormone that is secreted from adrenal medulla is dopamine. So these are the hormones as well as neurotransmitters, because adrenal medulla is developed from neural crest. Let's talk about half-life of catecholamines. So these hormones are also called as catecholamines because they are derived from amino acid derivative. So half-life of this catecholamine, that means hormones of adrenal medulla, is only 2 minutes. Let us talk about actions or functions of adrenaline and noradrenaline. So adrenaline and noradrenaline have the similar effect of sympathetic stimulation, because just I have told you that sympathetic nervous system and adrenal medulla both are developed from same structure, that is neural crest. So their secretions are same, and when there is a secretions are same, there is a similar action or similar effect as that of sympathetic stimulation. So adrenaline and noradrenaline have similar effect of that of sympathetic nervous system. So epinephrine is the main catecholamine produced by adrenal medulla, in contrast to sympathetic ganglia which produce predominantly norepinephrine. So as we have seen that adrenaline secreting cells are 90%, while noradrenaline secreting cells are only in 10%. So epinephrine or adrenaline is the main catecholamine produced by adrenal medulla. Let us talk about mode of action. As these hormones are binds with membrane receptors, because these are the catecholamines, and catecholamines are binds with the membrane receptors, that means receptors which are present on the membrane of cell or particularly target cell. So actions of adrenaline and noradrenaline are executed by binding with membrane receptors, and after binding with membrane receptors, these hormones forms HRC, and this HRC is responsible for formation of second messengers such as cyclic AMP or calcium ions. So adrenergic receptors are of two types, that means receptors which bind with the adrenal hormone, adrenaline and noradrenaline hormones. So there are two types of receptors. First one is alpha adrenergic receptor and second is beta adrenergic receptors. Again, alpha adrenergic receptors are divided into first and second, that means alpha 1 receptors and alpha 2 receptors, while beta receptors are also divided into beta 1 receptors and beta 2 receptors. So these are the receptors which are present in the target cell or particularly on the membrane of target cells, and these receptors are bind with adrenaline and noradrenaline. So let us see with the diagram. Adrenaline acts through alpha and beta receptors equally, whereas noradrenaline acts mainly through alpha receptors while occasionally through beta receptors. That means on target cell, various alpha and beta receptors are present for binding with the adrenaline and noradrenaline hormones. So, out of these two hormones, adrenaline acts equally or adrenaline binds equally with alpha and beta receptors, whereas noradrenaline mainly binds with alpha receptors and occasionally binds with beta receptors. So, on the cell membranes, there are alpha and beta receptors are equally distributed of the target cell, but adrenaline binds with these alpha and beta receptors equally, while noradrenaline mainly binds with alpha receptors than that of beta receptors. So, beta receptors occasionally this noradrenaline binds with beta receptors, but mainly noradrenaline binds with alpha receptors, whereas adrenaline binds with alpha as well as beta receptors equally. Both epinephrine and norepinephrine signal the liver and skeletal muscle cells to convert glycogen into glucose, resulting in increased blood glucose levels. So, this is the most important action of adrenaline and noradrenaline, that is, both are giving signal to liver and skeletal muscle cell to convert glycogen into the glucose, that means glycogenolysis, because here is a breakdown of glycogen into the glucose. So adrenaline and noradrenaline stimulates the process of glycogenolysis. So in liver and skeletal muscle cells, glycogen which is stored in the cells, so these glycogen molecules are converted or broken down into glucose molecules, and when there is a formation of more glucose molecules, there is a increased blood levels, particularly blood sugar level. These hormones increase heart rate, pulse and blood pressure to prepare the body to fight the perceived threat or escape from it. As we have just seen that adrenaline and noradrenaline, that means hormones of adrenal medulla, are responsible for acute stress, to combat the acute stress or to resist the acute stress. So in this slide we have seen that here the word acute or short term stress. So adrenal medulla hormones are responsible for resist the short term stress or acute stress. So these hormones are responsible for fight against the acute threat or escape from the acute threat. So main important functions of adrenaline and noradrenaline, that is, it increases blood sugar level through the process of glycogenolysis, that means breakdown of glycogen into the glucose molecules. While these hormones are also increases heart rate, pulse and blood pressure. So heart rate and pulse and blood pressures are increased during the preparation of body to fight against perceived threat or escape from it. So these hormones are called as fight and flight hormones, or these hormones are responsible for fight and flight mechanism. In addition, it dilates the airways and raising the blood oxygen levels. So during fight or flight mechanism, our body requires more amount of oxygen as well as more amount of blood. So adrenaline and noradrenaline dilates our airways and raises our oxygen levels, blood oxygen's level. It also prompts vasodilatation. That means adrenaline and noradrenaline are responsible for immediate vasodilatation, and this immediate vasodilatation causes increased blood flow, and when there is an increased blood flow there is an increased oxygen supply to important organs of our body. So adrenaline and noradrenaline causes prompt vasodilatation, further increasing the oxygenation of important organs such as lungs, brain, heart and skeletal muscle. So during fight or flight mechanism, our main important organs of body such as lungs, brain, heart and skeletal muscle requires more oxygen. So when there is a vasodilatation, that means increased blood flow to these important organs of the body. So when there is a increased blood flow, that means increased oxygen to these important organs, and the action of this adrenaline and noradrenaline is, that is vasodilatation. So this is the most important action of adrenaline and noradrenaline, because they are responsible for vasodilatation as well as dilatation of airways. So both these actions combinedly causes or increases our blood oxygen level and supply of more oxygen to important organs such as lungs, brain, heart and skeletal muscle. At the same time, it triggers vasoconstriction to blood vessels serving less essential organs such as gastrointestinal tract and skin. So at the same time, vasoconstrictions of blood vessels which are supplying to less essential organs such as gastrointestinal tract and skin. So let us see actions of adrenaline in detail. So we will see these actions in the next lecture. So before concluding today's lecture, a short recap on the today's lecture. So for that we have to go on the previous slide or first slide. So we have started this lecture with the topic adrenal sex hormones. So adrenal sex hormone, these are secreted from mainly zona reticularis, and very small quantity of hormones are secreted. Why it is called small quantity? Because these hormones are secreted in less quantity as compared to testes. That means testes secrete more androgens, but zona reticularis secretes less quantity of androgens. So zona reticularis is the source of secretion of these adrenal sex hormones. So we have to use continue adrenal sex hormones. So here we have to use adrenal sex hormones than that of sex hormones, because sex hormones are also secreted from testes and ovaries. But adrenal sex hormone, the terminology is related to sex hormones which are secreted from adrenal cortex or particularly zona reticularis. So adrenal sex hormones are secreted mainly from zona reticularis, while from small quantity these are secreted from zona fasciculata. Adrenal cortex secretes mainly androgens, that means they are secreted mainly male sex hormone than that of female sex hormones. So androgens secreted by adrenal cortex are, these are the three androgens: dehydroepiandrosterone, androstenedione and testosterone. So out of these three, first one is the most active, but all these androgens are secreted in less quantity compared to secretion from the testes. So these hormones or their activity is very insignificant. But when they are hypersecreted abnormally, there is no any special effect in the males, but in females it will produce masculine effects. So after that we have seen applied physiology of adrenal cortex. In applied physiology of adrenal cortex, we have seen three terminologies. That is, first one is Cushing's syndrome, then second is Cushing disease, and third one is hyperaldosteronism. So Cushing syndrome and Cushing disease, these are the two terminologies, but there is the same thing is there, that is hypersecretion of cortisol is the same thing, but causation for hypersecretion of cortisol is different in both of these. In Cushing syndrome, causation is present in the adrenal gland, while in Cushing disease, causation is present in pituitary gland. So after that we have seen hyperaldosteronism, that means hypersecretion of aldosterone, and this is due to the tumor of zona glomerulosa cells of adrenal cortex. After that we have started or we have completed adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla consists of 20% part, and which is inner part of adrenal gland. So for long-term stress, glucocorticoids are responsible, while to combat or to resist short-term stress, adrenal medulla hormones are important. So medullary tissue is composed of chromaffin cells or pheochrome cells or chromophil cells, and these cells are again of two types. First one is adrenaline secreting chromaffin cells or noradrenaline secreting chromaffin cells. So adrenaline secreting cells are 90%, while noradrenaline secreting cells are only 10%. So secretion ratio of both these hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline, is 4:1. That means adrenaline is secreted in large amount or large quantity, while noradrenaline is secreted in very less quantity, and ratio is 4:1. Let us see the hormones which are secreted from adrenal medulla. So there are three hormones or neurotransmitter which are secreted from adrenal medulla. First one is adrenaline, and this adrenaline is also called as epinephrine. Second one is noradrenaline. This noradrenaline is also called as norepinephrine, and third one is dopamine. So these all three are neurotransmitters or hormones secreted from adrenal medulla. Then about their half-life period, the half-life period of these catecholamines or these medulla hormones is only 2 minutes. Then we have seen after that actions of adrenaline and noradrenaline. So their action is similar to the sympathetic nervous system, because adrenal medulla and sympathetic nervous system both are developed from neural crest. So let us see in short actions of adrenaline and noradrenaline. So epinephrine is the main catecholamine produced by adrenal medulla, because epinephrine secreting cells are 90% in the adrenal medulla. So epinephrine is the main catecholamine. Then mode of action is through membrane receptors, and these membrane receptors are of again two types. First one is alpha adrenergic receptor and second is beta adrenergic receptors. While alpha adrenergic receptors are again divided into two types, alpha 1 receptors and alpha 2 receptors, while beta adrenergic receptors are again divided into beta 1 and beta 2. So adrenaline acts or binds with alpha and beta receptors equally, while noradrenaline binds mainly with alpha receptors and occasionally with the beta receptors. But both these hormones act through the second messenger, because they binds with the membrane receptors. Then important actions of adrenaline and noradrenaline. So adrenaline and noradrenaline causes or stimulates the process of glycogenolysis, that means breakdown of glycogen into the glucose, so that glucose level in the blood get increases. So adrenaline and noradrenaline are also responsible for increase of our BSL level, that means blood sugar level. Then another action is it increases our heart rate, pulse and BP. So by increasing all these, they are preparing our body during fight or flight mechanism against any perceived threat. It also dilates airways and raising our blood oxygen levels. So during fight and flight mechanism, our body requires more oxygen as well as more blood flow to main important organs such as lungs, heart and brain and skeletal muscles. So this adrenaline and noradrenaline causes prompt vasodilation of blood vessels which are supplying to main important organs such as lungs, brain and heart and skeletal muscle. While at the same time adrenaline and noradrenaline causes vasoconstriction of blood vessels which are supplying to less essential organs such as GIT, skin. So we will see the detailed actions of adrenaline and noradrenaline in the next lecture. So thanks for watching this video.